3 weeks passed after the awakening. 3 weeks of chaos, confusion, and terrible discovery. Taeho worked day and night to restore communications with the other human vessels. Of the 30 arcs that had been hidden across the Orc cloud, only 22 responded. 8 had failed during the long sleep. Their power systems had died. Their people had never woken up. 3 million humans, lost forever to the cold darkness of space. But 8 million remained. 8 million sleepers spread across 22 vessels, slowly waking from their frozen dreams. Yuna spent those weeks studying the enemy. She watched every recording, read every intercepted message, and learned everything she could about the Vakari Dominion. What she found made her sick to her stomach. The Vakari were insectoids creatures that looked like giant mantises, with sharp claws and compound eyes that saw everything. They had once been a small species, living on a single world at the edge of the galaxy. But 2,000 years ago, they had discovered faster-than-light travel, and their hunger for power had grown without limit. At first, they had traded with other species. Then they had demanded tribute. And when the tribute was not enough, they had taken what they wanted by force. The first species to fall were the Lomari gentle beings, with silver skin, who had built their civilization on art and philosophy. The Vakari had given them a simple choice: serve or die. The Lumari had chosen to serve, believing that peace was always better than war. Now, 3 centuries later, their entire race worked in Vakari mines, digging precious metals from the ground until their bodies broke. The second species to fall were the deepkin aquatic creatures who lived in the vast oceans of Desert. They had tried to fight back, using their knowledge of water and currents to hide from Vakari ships. But the Vakari had simply boiled their oceans, turning water into steam until billions of deepkin died screaming. The survivors were captured and forced to work in underwater labor camps, harvesting food for their conquerors. The third species to fall were the crystalline beings made of living crystal who could think faster than any computer. The Vakari did not kill them. Instead, they shattered their bodies into pieces and used those pieces as processors for their war machines. The crystalline were still alive, still conscious, but trapped forever inside Vakari technology, and so it continued. Species after species fell to the Dominion. Some fought bravely and died. Some surrendered quickly and lived as slaves. Some tried to run, but there was nowhere to run to. The Vakari were everywhere, and their hunger was endless. Myre read the medical reports from the conquered worlds. She saw images of alien children working in factories, their small bodies bent and broken from endless labor. She saw hospitals that had become execution chambers, where the sick and the old were killed because they could no longer work. She saw mass graves filled with millions of bodies, left to rot in the sun because the Vakari did not care enough to bury them. She cried for 3 days straight. Then she stopped crying and started planning. On the 22nd day after the awakening, Yuna called a meeting of all the Arc commanders. They gathered through quantum communication, their faces appearing on screens across 22 different vessels. Some were old soldiers like Yuna. Some were scientists, engineers, doctors. All of them had the same look in their eyes, the look of people who had seen too much and could not unsee it. "You have all read the reports," Yuna said. Her voice was calm, but her hands were shaking. "You know what has happened while we slept. You know what the Vakari have done to this galaxy." The commanders nodded in silence. "We have a choice to make," Yuna continued. "We can stay hidden. The Vakari do not know we exist. Our vessels are small, our signals are weak, and we are far from their territory. If we remain silent, we might survive for another 1,000 years." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Or we can fight." A commander named Jiwan spoke up. He was an old man, nearly 70 when he had entered cryosleep, and his voice was rough with age. "Fight? With what?" We have no fleet. We have no army. We have 8 million people against an empire of trillions. We have more than you think, Taiho said. He pulled up images on the shared screen, old blueprints, weapon designs, ship schematics. Before the long sleep, we stored everything. Military technology, weapon systems, manufacturing plans. All of it has been preserved in our databases. We can build a fleet. A fleet of what? 100 ships? 1,000? Jiwan shook his head. The Vakari have 10,000 warships. Maybe more. We cannot win a direct war. Ben, we do not fight a direct war, Yuna said. We fight a different kind of war. A war of shadows and ghosts. We strike where they do not expect. We vanish before they can respond. We make them afraid of the dark. Another commander, a woman named Sujin, leaned forward. And what about the enslaved species? What about the Lomari and the Deepkin and all the others? Yuna's eyes hardened. We free them. Every world, every camp, every prison. We give them weapons and training and hope. We turn the Vakari slaves into their worst nightmare. The room fell silent. The commanders looked at each other, weighing the risks, calculating the odds. They all knew that this was madness. They all knew that 8 million humans could not defeat an empire that had crushed 40 species, but they also knew something else. They knew that hiding was not living. They knew that survival meant nothing if it came at the cost of their souls. Myre spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft, but every commander heard her clearly. I have seen what the Vakari do to the people they conquer. I have seen children worked to death in mines. I have seen entire species erased from existence. If we hide, we are safe. But if we hide, we become like them. We become people who watch suffering and do nothing. She looked at Yuna, and there were tears in her eyes, but also something stronger. Something that looked like fire. I did not survive 300 years of sleep to become a coward. I became a doctor to save lives. And right now, there are billions of lives that need saving. The vote was held in silence. One by one, the commanders pressed their buttons, yes or no, fight or hide. When the results appeared on the screen, Yuna felt her heart stop for a moment. 22 votes. 22 commanders. 22 votes for war. Jiwan, the old man who had spoken against fighting, let out a long breath. I voted yes, he said quietly. Not because I think we can win, but because some things are worth dying for. Yuna nodded. She understood. They all understood. The next few months would be the hardest of their lives. They would have to wake millions of sleepers, train them for combat, and build a fleet from nothing. They would have to plan attacks against an enemy that had never been defeated. They would have to find allies among species that had been broken and enslaved for centuries. But for the first time since the awakening, Yuna felt something other than fear and anger. She felt hope. The Vakari Dominion had conquered the galaxy. They had crushed every enemy, silenced every voice, and declared themselves the eternal masters of all existence. They did not know that in the darkness of the Orc cloud, 8 million humans were preparing to prove them wrong. The long sleep was over. The war was about to begin. The darkness inside asteroid K7742 had lasted for 300 years. No sound, no movement, no light, just endless cold and silence, broken only by the soft hum of machines that kept millions of humans frozen between life and death. Deep within the hollow rock, rows upon rows of glass pods stretched into the darkness. Inside each pod lay a human body, perfectly still, ice crystals covering their skin like tiny diamonds. They had been sleeping since the day Earth's sun began to die, since the day humanity decided to hide rather than face extinction. Yuna floated in her pod, dreaming of nothing. She had been a soldier once, a woman who planned battles and led armies. At 34 years old, she had watched the last human cities empty as people walked into the freezing chambers. She had been among the final ones to close her eyes, her last thought a simple hope that someday, somehow, things would be better when she woke. That day had finally come. A red light blinked in the darkness. Then another. Then 100 more. Alarms that had been silent for centuries began to scream. The machines had detected something, signals coming from deep space, voices speaking in languages that were not human. The emergency protocols activated. Heating systems groaned back to life. Ice began to melt. Hearts that had not beaten in 300 years slowly started to pump again. Yuna's eyes opened first. She gasped, choking on the cold air that filled her lungs. Her body shook violently as warmth returned to her frozen muscles. She tried to move her fingers, but they felt like stone. Slowly, painfully, she pushed against the glass lid of her pod. It hissed open, and she fell onto the metal floor, coughing and shivering. Around her, other pods were opening. Men and women stumbled out, confused and weak. Some cried. Some vomited. Some simply lay on the floor, too tired to move. A man crawled toward Yuna. His name was Taiho, and he had been the chief engineer of this vessel before the long sleep. His hair was gray now, touched by the cold, and his hands trembled as he reached for her. "What happened?" he asked, his voice rough from centuries of silence. "Why did we wake up?" Yuna shook her head. She did not know. But the alarms were still screaming, and the red lights were still flashing, which meant something had triggered the emergency systems. She forced herself to stand. Her legs nearly gave out, but she grabbed the edge of a pod and held on. "We need to reach the control room," she said. "We need to find out what is happening." It took them an hour to walk a distance that should have taken 5 minutes. Their bodies were weak. Their muscles had forgotten how to work properly. But Yuna pushed forward, and Taiho followed, and behind them came a dozen others who were strong enough to move. The control room was dark when they arrived. Dust covered every surface. Screens that had been sleeping for 300 years flickered to life as Taiho touched the main console. What they saw made Yuna's blood run cold. The screens showed signals, thousands of them, coming from every corner of the galaxy. But these were not human signals. The language was harsh and clicking, full of sounds that human throats could never make. And the images that came with the signals were worse. Cities burning, ships exploding, entire planets covered in smoke and fire. "What is this?" whispered a young woman behind Yuna. Her name was Myri, and she had been a doctor before the sleep. She was only 26 when she entered her pod, and her face still looked young despite the centuries that had passed. Taiho worked the controls, his fingers moving faster as fear pushed away his weakness. "These signals are old," he said. "Some of them are 200 years old. The computers have been collecting them while we slept." He pulled up a translation program, something the old scientists had created to decode alien languages. The clicking sounds slowly became words. "The Lumari have fallen. Their world belongs to the Dominion now. Desser 4 is ours. The water creatures are being collected for labor. No more resistance. The galaxy is clean. All species bow to the Vicari." Yuna listened in silence. Each message told the same story. An empire called the Vicari Dominion had spent the last 300 years conquering everything. While humans slept in their frozen tombs, alien civilizations had risen, fought, and died. Now there was only one power left of Vicari. "How many species?" Yuna asked quietly. Taiho checked the data. His face turned pale. "Over 40. Some are extinct. Others are slaves. The Vicari control everything from the core to the outer rim." Myre covered her mouth with her hand. We slept while all of this happened. We hid while entire worlds died. We did not know, Taiho said. We could not have known. But Yuna said nothing. She stared at the screen, at the images of burning cities and enslaved people. She thought about the choice humanity had made 3 centuries ago. The choice to run, to hide, to save themselves and leave the universe to its fate. They had survived. But at what cost? A new signal appeared on the screen. This one was recent, only a few hours old. The translation program worked quickly, and soon the words appeared in human text. This is the supreme archon of the Vakari Dominion. Let all worlds hear and remember. The galaxy is ours. There is nothing left to fear, nothing left to challenge us. We are eternal. We are absolute. We are the only power that matters. The message repeated over and over, broadcast to every corner of space. Yuna turned away from the screen. Around her, the awakened humans looked at her with fear in their eyes. They were weak, confused, and scared. They had woken up to a nightmare they could never have imagined. But Yuna was not afraid. She was angry. Contact the other vessels, she said to Taiho. Find out how many of us survived the sleep. And then what? He asked. Yuna looked back at the screen one more time. The Vakari Archon's message was still playing, his voice full of pride and power. They think they have won, she said quietly. They think there is nothing left to challenge them. She turned to face the others, and her eyes were hard as stone. They are wrong. Myre stepped forward. What can we do? We are only a few million against an empire of thousands of worlds. Yuna smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We are humans, she said. We have been fighting wars since before we could write. We have survived ice ages, plagues, and the death of our own son. We do not know how to give up. She looked at each person in the room, one by one. The Vakari have forgotten what it means to face a real enemy. They have grown soft and lazy in their victory. But we are awake now. And we remember. The red lights continued to flash. The alarms continued to scream. But in that cold, dark control room, something new was born, something the Vakari Dominion had never faced before. Hope and the promise of war. 6 months after the awakening, the first human warship left the Orc cloud. It was not a large ship. It was not a powerful ship. It was an old mining vessel, rebuilt with weapons and armor, crewed by 50 men and women who had trained for combat in virtual reality because there was no time for real practice. But it was a beginning. Yuna watched the ship disappear into the darkness of space, and she felt a strange mix of pride and fear. Pride because her people had built something from nothing. Fear because she was sending them into a war they might not survive. The ship was called the Baekdu, named after a mountain that had once stood tall in Korea, back when Earth was still alive. Its captain was a man named Junsu, a former fighter pilot who had spent a long sleep dreaming of the stars. He was young, only 32, with quick eyes and steady hands. Yuna trusted him completely. His mission was simple. Find a Vakari outpost, destroy it, and disappear before anyone could respond. The Vakari had hundreds of outposts scattered across the outer rim of the galaxy-small stations that watched for threats and collected tribute from nearby systems. They were not heavily defended because the Vakari believed there were no threats left to watch for. They were wrong. The Baekdu arrived at outpost 7742 in the middle of the night cycle. The Vakari guards were sleeping, their weapons stored away, their shields powered down. They never saw the human ship coming. Junsu gave the order to fire. Missiles streaked through the void, slamming into the station with enough force to crack it open like an egg. Secondary explosions tore through the structure as fuel tanks ignited and power cores overloaded. Within minutes, the entire outpost was nothing but floating debris. No survivors. No distress signals. No evidence of what had happened. The Baekdu vanished into hyperspace, leaving nothing behind but silence. 2 days later, the Vakari High Command received reports of the destroyed outpost. They assumed it was an accident, a malfunction in the power systems perhaps, or a collision with space debris. Such things happened occasionally, even in the mighty Dominion. Then a second outpost went dark, and a third, and a fourth. Within a month, 8 Vakari outposts had been destroyed. The pattern was always the same. No warning, no survivors, no explanation. The stations simply ceased to exist. The Vakari Supreme Archon, a massive insectoid creature named Vector, called a meeting of his generals. They gathered in his throne room on the capital world of Vekar Prime, their compound eyes reflecting the dim red light of the chamber. "Explain this to me," Vector said, his clicking voice echoing through the room. "How do 8 outposts vanish without a trace?" The generals looked at each other nervously. None of them wanted to speak first. Finally, a general named Crix stepped forward. He was old for a Vakari, his exoskeleton cracked and worn from centuries of war. "Supreme Archon, we have investigated thoroughly. There are no signs of enemy activity. No foreign ships, no weapon signatures, no communications. Then what destroyed them? We do not know." Vector's claws twitched with anger. "You do not know? I have conquered 40 species. I have crushed every army, burned every world, silenced every voice that dared to challenge me. And you tell me that something is destroying my outposts, and you do not know what it is?" Crix lowered his head. "We are continuing to investigate, Supreme Archon, but our sensors show nothing. It is as if the outposts were destroyed by ghosts." The word hung in the air like a curse. Ghosts. Impossible. The Vakari did not believe in ghosts. But deep in the throne room, Vector felt something he had not felt in 200 years. It was small, barely noticeable, like a cold wind brushing against his shell. It was fear. Far away, in the darkness of the Urk cloud, Yuna received the reports from Junsu and smiled. "Ghosts," she said to Taiho. "I like that. Let them think they are being haunted by spirits." Taiho nodded, but his face was worried. "The attacks are working, but we cannot keep this up forever. Sooner or later, the Vakari will figure out what is happening. They will send a real fleet to hunt us down." "I know," Yuna said. "That is why we need allies." She pulled up a map of the galaxy on her screen. Dots of different colors marked the locations of enslaved species, the Lumari in their mining camps, the Deepkin in their underwater prisons, the Crystari embedded in Vakari machines. "These people have been waiting for liberation for 300 years, Yuna said. "They have lost hope. They have forgotten what freedom feels like. But if we show them that the Vakari can be hurt, if we prove that the Dominion is not invincible, they will rise." A woman named Harry stepped forward. She was the head of human intelligence, a quiet person with sharp eyes, who spent her days intercepting Vakari communications. "I have been listening to their broadcasts," she said. "The enslaved species are already talking about the attacks. They call us the Sleeping Ones, beings from ancient legends who would return when the galaxy needed them most." "Legends?" Yuna raised an eyebrow. Harry smiled slightly. "Apparently, the Lumari have old stories about a species that hid among the stars, waiting for the right moment to wake up and save the universe. They thought it was just a myth. Now they are not so sure." Yuna leaned back in her chair, thinking. Legends could be powerful things. They could inspire hope in people who had forgotten how to hope. They could turn slaves into warriors and victims into heroes. "Then let us become the legend," she said. "Let us give them something to believe in." Over the next few months, the human attacks intensified. Jamsu led raids on supply convoys, stealing food and medicine that had been taken from enslaved worlds. A weapons engineer named Dongwu developed new technologies, gravity bombs that could crush Vakari ships like paper, energy shields that could deflect their weapons. And slowly, carefully, the humans began to make contact with the enslaved species. The first meeting happened on a moon called Thesa, where a small group of Deepkin survivors had escaped from their underwater prison. Myray traveled there herself, bringing medical supplies and translators. The Deepkin elder who met her was ancient. His scales faded and cracked from centuries of hard labor. He looked at Myray with eyes that had seen too much suffering, and for a long moment he said nothing. Then he spoke, his voice like water flowing over stones. "Are you the sleeping ones?" Myray knelt before him, showing respect. "We are humans. We slept for 300 years while your people suffered. We cannot undo what has been done, but we can fight alongside you now." The elder studied her face. "The Vakari are powerful. They have crushed every species that has opposed them. They have never faced us," Myray said simply. The elder was silent for another long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out and touched Myray's hand. "My people have prayed for salvation for 300 years, he said. "We had stopped believing anyone would answer. But you are here. You are real." His voice cracked with emotion. "Tell me what you need from us." Myray squeezed his hand gently. "We need your knowledge. Your maps of Vakari patrol routes. Your understanding of their weaknesses. And when the time comes, we need your warriors to fight beside us." The elder nodded slowly. "You will have all of this. And more." He looked up at the stars, his old eyes reflecting the distant lights. "The sleeping ones have awakened, and the Vakari will learn what it means to face a galaxy that refuses to kneel." Word spread quickly among the enslaved species. The sleeping ones were real. The ghosts who haunted the outer rim were coming to save them. Hope, which had been dead for centuries, began to stir again. And in the darkness of space, the ghost fleet grew stronger every day. The Vakari Dominion had ruled the galaxy for 300 years. They had crushed every enemy, broken every resistance, and declared themselves the eternal masters of all existence. They did not know it yet, but their empire was about to fall. The first real battle of the war happened above the drowned world of the SSAR-4.YUN had chosen this world carefully. The Deepkin who survived there numbered only 300,000, a tiny fraction of the billions who had once filled their oceans. But they were strong, determined, and desperate for freedom. And their world held something the Vakari valued greatly: vast underwater farms that produced food for dozens of Dominion planets. If the humans could free the SSAR-4, they would prove that the Vakari could be defeated in open combat, and they would cut off food supplies to a significant portion of the enemy empire. The Ghost Fleet gathered in the shadow of a dead moon, 200 ships of various sizes hiding in the darkness. Some were human vessels, built in secret over the past year. Others belonged to the Deepkin resistance, old fishing boats modified with stolen Vakari weapons. A few were Lumari trading ships that had escaped the conquest centuries ago and had been hiding ever since Dod. It was not a powerful fleet. It was not a professional fleet. But it was a fleet of beings who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. JUN SU commanded the fighter squadrons from his ship, the Baekdu. Taiho coordinated logistics from the Ark Jurison, which had been converted into a mobile command center. Myray led a medical team that would descend to the surface once the battle was won. And Yuna stood at the center of it all, watching the tactical displays with cold, calculating eyes. The Vakari Defense Force consists of 50 warships, Harry reported from her intelligence station. They are not expecting an attack. Their shields are at minimum power, and most of their fighters are docked. Yuna nodded. Then we hit them fast and hard. No warning, no mercy. She opened a channel to the entire fleet. 200 ships, thousands of warriors, all listening to her voice. "This is Commander Yuna of the Human Forces," she said. "Today, we strike our first blow against the Vakari Dominion. Today, we prove that their empire is not invincible. Today, we free the Deepkin of Desert 4. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the fleet. "I will not lie to you. Many of us will die in this battle. The Vakari are strong, and they will fight to protect what they have stolen. But we are stronger, not because of our weapons or our ships, but because of what we fight for. We fight for freedom. We fight for justice. We fight for every species that has been crushed beneath the Vakari boot." Her voice hardened. "The Vakari have ruled this galaxy through fear. Today, we teach them what fear really means." She raised her hand and brought it down sharply. "All ships, attack." The ghost fleet erupted from the shadow of the moon like a wave of fire. Junsu's fighters led the charge, screaming through the void at impossible speeds, their weapons blazing. Behind them came the larger ships, their cannons firing gravity bombs and antimatter torpedoes. The Vakari were caught completely off guard. Their first warning was the explosion of their flagship, torn apart by a direct hit from Dongwu's newest weapon, a gravity lance that could crush metal like paper. Within seconds, chaos erupted across the defense fleet. Vakari pilots scrambled to launch their fighters, but Junsu's squadrons were already among them, dancing through the formations with deadly precision. Human pilots had spent centuries fighting each other in simulation after simulation, learning the art of space combat in ways no other species had ever imagined. Against them, the Vakari pilots were slow and clumsy. "Enemy carrier destroyed," Jinsu reported, his voice calm despite the mayhem around him. "Moving to secondary targets." "Ground defenses are activating," Harry warned. "They are launching surface-to-orbit missiles." Yuna did not hesitate. "Taiho, deploy the shield generators. Protect the landing craft." Taiho's engineers had stolen Vakari shield technology and modified it to cover multiple ships at once. Now, a dome of energy appeared above the atmosphere of Desert 4, blocking the missiles before they could reach the fleet below on the surface of the drowned world. The Deepkin slaves looked up and saw the sky burning with light. They did not know what was happening. They did not know that their salvation had finally arrived, but they hoped. For the first time in centuries, they hoped. The battle lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of fire and death, of ships exploding and pilots dying, of desperate attacks and desperate defenses. The Vakari fought harder than Yuna had expected, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. By the time their reinforcements arrived from a nearby system, it was too late. The defense fleet was destroyed. The orbital platforms were captured. The surface installations were in human hands. Desert 4 was free. Myray was among the first to land on the surface. Her medical ship descended through the smoke-filled atmosphere and touched down near the largest labor camp, where 100,000 Deepkin worked in underwater harvesting facilities. When she stepped out of the ship, she found the Deepkin already emerging from the water. They came slowly at first, afraid and confused. Then, as they saw Moray's human face and the symbol of the ghost fleet on her uniform, they came faster. An elder swam to the edge of the water and pulled himself onto the shore. He was the same elder Myra had met months ago, the one who had first agreed to help the humans. His scales were still faded, his body still broken by centuries of labor. But his eyes were alive with something that had not been there before: joy. "You came," he said, his voice trembling. "You actually came." Myra knelt beside him and took his hand. "I told you we would." The elder looked up at the sky, where human ships patrolled above the clouds. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the salt water that clung to his scales. 300 years, he whispered. 300 years we have waited for this day. 300 years of slavery and suffering and death. And now, finally, it is over. Myray squeezed his hand gently. It is not over yet. There are still dozens of worlds to free. Billions of people still in chains. But today, we took the first step. And we will not stop until every one of them is free. The elder nodded slowly. Then he turned to his people, who had gathered on the shore in growing numbers. He raised his voice, speaking in the ancient language of the Deepkin. Brothers and sisters, hear me. The sleeping ones have come. The legends are true. Today, we are free. A roar went up from the crowd. Deepkin embraced each other, crying and laughing at the same time. Children who had been born in the labor camps, who had never known anything but slavery, danced in the shallow water and across the galaxy. Word spread. The Ghost Fleet had won its first battle. Desser 4 was liberated. The Vakari were not invincible. On Vector Prime, the Supreme Archon Vector received the news in silence. His generals stood before him, trembling with fear, waiting for his rage to explode. But Vector did not rage. He simply stared at the tactical display showing the loss of Desert 4, his compound eyes reflecting the red glow of the screen. Humans, he said finally, his clicking voice barely above a whisper. They call themselves humans. General Crix nodded nervously. Yes, Supreme Archon. Our intelligence indicates they are a species that was believed to be extinct. They apparently survived by hiding in cryogenic sleep at the edge of the galaxy. Vector's claws tightened on his throne. And now they have awakened. And they have come to challenge us. He rose to his full height, towering over his generals. His voice echoed through the throne room like thunder. Mobilize the war fleet. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon we have. I want these humans found and destroyed. I want their worlds burned. I want their species erased from existence so completely that no one will ever remember they existed. He turned to face the window, looking out at the endless expanse of his empire. They think they can challenge the Vakari Dominion. They think they can wake from their sleep and undo 300 years of conquest. His voice dropped to a hiss. They are wrong. And I will teach them the price of their arrogance. The war had truly begun. 2 years had passed since the awakening. 2 years of war, of liberation, of blood and fire and hope. The Ghost Fleet was no longer a fleet of ghosts. It was an armada 3,000 ships from a dozen different species, united under a single banner. The Deepkin had rebuilt their navy with human help. The Lumari had risen from their mines and forged their own warships. Even the Crystari, freed from Vakari machines, contributed their incredible processing power to coordinate the Allied forces. 47 species had joined the Alliance. 47 species that had been crushed and enslaved for centuries now stood together, ready to end the Dominion once and for all. And today, they would strike at the heart of the enemy empire. Vector Prime hung in the void like a dark jewel. It was the homeworld of the Vakari, the seat of their power, the center of everything they had built. Massive orbital platforms surrounded the planet, bristling with weapons. 10,000 warships formed a defensive sphere around it, the largest concentration of military force in the history of the galaxy. The Supreme Archon Vector had gathered every resource he had for this final battle. He knew that if Vector Prime fell, the Dominion would fall with it. He would not let that happen. The Allied Armada emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the system. 3,000 ships against 10,000. Outgunned, outnumbered, outmatched by every standard measure. But Yuna had never fought by standard measures. She stood on the bridge of the Jirisan, now converted into the flagship of the Allied fleet. Around her, officers from a dozen different species worked their stations, their eyes fixed on the tactical displays. Taiho stood at the engineering console, monitoring the ship's systems. Harry coordinated intelligence from her station, tracking enemy movements in real time. And beside Una stood Myray, who had refused to stay behind with the medical teams. "I have watched you lead this war for 2 years," Myray had said when Una tried to send her away. "I will be there when it ends." Now, looking at the massive Vakari fleet ahead of them, Una was grateful for her presence. "Open a channel to the fleet," Una said quietly. The communications officer nodded. "Channel open, Commander." Una took a deep breath. 3,000 ships, millions of warriors, all listening to her voice. "This is Commander Una. 2 years ago, we woke from a sleep that was supposed to last forever. We woke to a galaxy that had been conquered, a universe that had been broken. We had every reason to hide, to survive, to let the darkness win." She paused, her eyes sweeping across the bridge. "But we did not hide. We fought. We bled. We lost friends and brothers and sisters along the way. And now we stand at the gates of the enemy's home." Her voice hardened. "Today, we end this war. Today, we prove that no empire built on slavery and suffering can last forever. Today, we show the universe that hope is stronger than fear." She raised her fist. "For every species they crushed, for every world they burned, for every innocent life they stole. Today, the Vakari Dominion falls." A roar echoed across the fleet. Ships of every shape and size surged forward, their weapons charging, their shields blazing with power. The battle for Vicar Prime had begun. The first wave of the assault hit the Vakari defensive line like a hammer. Junsu led his fighter squadrons into the heart of the enemy formation, drawing fire away from the larger ships. Dongwu's gravity weapons tore through Vakari carriers, crushing them like insects. Allied battleships exchanged fire with enemy platforms, filling space with light and death. But the Vakari were not going to surrender easily. They had ruled the galaxy for 300 years, and they would not let it slip away without a fight. Wave after wave of Vakari fighters launched from their carriers. Massive warships pushed forward, their weapons blazing. For every enemy ship the Allies destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. "We are taking heavy casualties," Harry reported, her voice tight with tension. "The left flank is collapsing." Una studied the tactical display, her mind racing. The Vakari had more ships, more firepower, more everything. In a straight fight, they would win. So she would not give them a straight fight. "Signal the Deepkin fleet," she said. "Tell them to execute Maneuver Omega-7. The Deepkin ships, smaller and faster than most of the Allied vessels, suddenly broke formation and dove toward Vector Prime itself. They slipped through the gaps in the Vakari defensive line, heading straight for the planet. Vector saw the maneuver from his throne room and laughed. "Fools, what do they think they will accomplish? My world is defended by 1,000 orbital guns. They will be destroyed before they reach the atmosphere." But the Deepkin were not attacking the planet. They were attacking the orbital platforms that controlled the defensive grid. One by one, the platforms exploded as Deepkin ships crashed into them at full speed. The pilots knew they would not survive. They did it anyway. They had lived their entire lives as slaves, and now they died as warriors. The defensive grid flickered. Then it failed. Now, Una shouted, "All ships push forward!" The Allied armada surged through the gap in the Vakari defenses. Suddenly, the enemy fleet was surrounded on 3 sides, their formations broken, their coordination shattered. And then the Jurison arrived. Taiho had spent 2 years converting the massive Ark into a warship. It was the largest vessel in the Allied fleet, armed with weapons that had never been tested in combat. Now, it plowed through the Vakari line like a mountain moving through clouds. "Heading for the enemy flagship," Taiho reported. "Weapons charging." The Vakari flagship was a monstrous thing, larger than a city, bristling with guns and armor. The Supreme Archon himself commanded from its bridge, surrounded by his most loyal guards. The Jirsan fired. A beam of pure white light lanced across space, striking the flagship's shields. For a moment, the shields held. Then they shattered, and the beam tore through the hull like a knife through paper. "Boarding pods away," Yuna said. "I am going in." Marae grabbed her arm. "Yuna, you cannot." "I have to," Yuna said quietly. "This has to end. And I have to be the one to end it." She led a team of 50 soldiers through the burning corridors of the enemy flagship. Vakari guards attacked them every turn, but the humans pushed forward, fighting with a ferocity that terrified their enemies. Finally, they reached the throne room. The doors exploded inward, and Yuna stepped through the smoke. The Supreme Archon Vector stood before her, surrounded by his personal guard. He was massive, towering over the humans, his compound eyes gleaming with hatred. "So you are the human commander," he said, his clicking voice filled with contempt. "You are smaller than I expected." Yuna raised her weapon. "Size is not everything." Vector laughed, a harsh rattling sound. "You think you have won? You think destroying my fleet will end the Dominion? I am eternal. I am absolute. Kill me, and another will take my place. The Vakari will never surrender." Yuna lowered her weapon. Vector's eyes narrowed in confusion. "What are you doing?" "I am not here to kill you," Yuna said. "I am here to give you a choice." She stepped forward, and her voice echoed through the throne room. "The war is over. Your fleet is destroyed. Your empire is crumbling. You can die here, alone and forgotten, and your people will be hunted and destroyed. Or you can surrender, and your people will be allowed to live in peace." Vector's claws twitched. "You would show mercy? After everything we have done?" "Yes," Yuna said simply, "because that is what separates us from you. You conquered through fear and cruelty. We will build through compassion and hope. Your way failed. It is time to try ours." The throne room fell silent. Vector stared at Yuna, his ancient eyes filled with emotions she could not read. Then, slowly, he lowered his head. "I surrender," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The Dominion is finished." The word spread across every ship in the fleet, every planet in the galaxy. The Supreme Archon had surrendered. The war was over, and the galaxy was free. 50 years later, the Galactic Council met on a rebuilt Desert 4. 47 species gathered beneath the open sky, their representatives sitting together as equals. At the head of the table sat an elderly woman with gray hair and kind eyes. Yuna had served as the first human ambassador to the free galaxy, spending decades helping to rebuild what the Vakari had destroyed. Beside her sat Marae, now the head of the Interspecies Medical Corps, and Taiho, who had spent his life maintaining the old arcs as monuments to the long sleep. Sus! Deepkin Elder rose and raised a glass of saltwater wine. He was the same elder who had first met Marae on the shores of Desert 4, now ancient beyond measure but still alive to see this day. "To the sleeping ones," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber. "Who woke up angry?" Yuna smiled softly. "We were not angry. We were disappointed. There is a difference." The elder tilted his head. "What difference?" "Angry people destroy. Disappointed people rebuild." She looked around the chamber at the representatives of 47 free species. "And we have done a lot of rebuilding." The chamber erupted in applause. Humans, Deepkin, Lumari, Crystari, and dozens of other species raised their glasses together. Outside, the restored oceans of Desert 4 sparkled under a setting sun. Children of every species played on the beaches, laughing and splashing in the water, knowing nothing of the darkness that had come before. The long sleep was over. The galaxy was finally awake.